She was drunk, furious, humiliated, and barely able to walk straight when it happened. 1 second, she was stumbling through a private club, packed with people too rich to care and too dangerous to cross. The next, she slammed straight into the chest of the one man every person in that room feared. Her fingers twisted into the front of his black shirt. Her breath shook. Her lipstick was smudged. Her wedding ring was still on her hand. And before anyone could move, before security could pull her away, before she could even think about what she was doing, she dragged him down by the collar and kissed him like she was trying to destroy the life she had just lost. The room went silent. Men who had seen bloodshed lowered their eyes. Women stopped breathing. Because the man she had just kissed was not some stranger at a bar. He was Declan Wolfe, the man whispered about in boardrooms, back rooms, and locked offices, the man who never forgot a face, never forgave disrespect, and never let go of anything he decided was his. And standing only a few feet away, frozen with horror and disbelief, was the husband who had betrayed her just hours earlier. Engage in our comment section and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Whether you're in Georgia, Moscow, Ohio, California, New York, Mexico City, Tokyo, drop your location below. And if you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our videos. Because the truth is, that kiss was not just revenge. It was the first move in a chain of events that would destroy one marriage, ruin 2 reputations, bring a powerful man to his knees, and pull one broken woman into a world where love came wrapped in danger, obsession, and a promise no one walks away from. 3 hours earlier, Amelia Hart still believed the worst thing that could happen to her that night was another empty apology from the husband who had been slowly disappearing from her life for months. She had spent the entire afternoon trying to convince herself that marriage was just hard, that distance was normal, that coldness could be explained away by stress, and that maybe, if she kept being patient, the man she married would finally remember who she was to him. She had arranged everything carefully. Her hair, her dress, the dinner reservation, the gift box in her hand. It was their anniversary, and despite everything, some stubborn part of her still wanted to believe that if she showed up first, that if she smiled first, if she loved harder, she could pull her marriage back from the edge. Her husband, Grant Mercer, had spent the last year building a polished image of success. He was handsome, wealthy, admired, and photographed in the right places with the right people. To everyone watching from the outside, he looked like the kind of man women fought to keep. But Amelia knew the truth no one else could see. The late nights, the cold glances, the way he answered her questions with irritation instead of affection, the way he made her feel foolish for noticing that his assistant, Vanessa Cole, always stood a little too close, smiled a little too long, and spoke to him with the kind of confidence no employee should ever have with a married man. Every time Amelia brought it up, Grant had the same response. He told her she was insecure. He told her Vanessa was efficient. He told her she was imagining things, and that might have worked on another woman. But Amelia was not weak. She was loyal. There was a difference, and loyalty, when betrayed, becomes something far more dangerous than anger. When Amelia entered the penthouse that night, she expected silence. Instead, she heard laughter. Low, intimate, familiar in the worst possible way. She stood still for one breath, then another, her fingers tightening around the small gift bag in her hand as she listened. The sound was coming from upstairs. She called Grant's name once. No answer. She climbed the staircase slowly, each step colder than the last, until she reached the half-open bedroom door. And there it was, the moment that splits a life in two. Grant Mercer, her husband, tangled in expensive sheets with Vanessa Cole, the assistant he told her not to worry about. Vanessa was wearing one of Amelia's silk robes. Grant looked up in shock, but not enough shame. And Vanessa. Vanessa smiled, not because she was embarrassed, not because she was caught. She smiled because she thought she had won. The gift bag slipped from Amelia's hand. The bottle inside hit the floor and shattered. The sound was sharp enough to cut through the room, but Amelia said nothing at first. She just stared at the man she had defended, at the woman who had watched her from conference tables and charity dinners with a secret already in her mouth. Then Amelia asked the only question that mattered. How long? Grant opened his mouth, but Vanessa answered first. Long enough, she said, to know he was never really yours. That was the moment something changed in Amelia. Not loudly, not dramatically. Something colder than tears. Something clearer than rage. She slid her wedding ring off her finger, walked to the bed, and placed it on the nightstand beside the husband who had broken every promise he ever made her. Then she looked him in the eyes and said, "You didn't betray me tonight. You betrayed me every day you watched me lose myself trying to trust a liar." And then she left. Most people think the loudest heartbreak is the deepest. They think betrayal looks like screaming, broken plates, desperate phone calls, mascara running down a face that still wants answers. But the deepest kind of heartbreak is often silent. It's the kind that empties you out so completely that your body keeps moving while your soul stands still. That was Amelia in the elevator. Still breathing, still upright, but hollow. But by the time she reached the lobby, Grant was calling. Again and again and again. She ignored every call. Then came the messages. It was a mistake. Let me explain. It meant nothing. Don't do anything stupid. That last one made her laugh out loud for the first time all night. Don't do anything stupid. As if she were the danger in this story. As if she had been the one in bed with someone else. As if he still had the right to tell her what to do. She walked out onto the street, got into the first car she saw, and gave the driver the name of the only place she could think of. A private club downtown where people with money went to disappear. She did not go there because she was reckless. She went there because she wanted noise louder than the thoughts in her head. She wanted music strong enough to drown out the memory of that smile on Vanessa's face. She wanted a drink she didn't have to sip politely. She wanted 1 hour where she did not have to be Grant Mercer's wife. What she did not know was that the club she chose that night did not belong to the city. It belonged to Declan Wolfe. By the time Amelia stepped inside, she had already had too much to drink. Not enough to forget. Just enough to stop caring, who saw her falling apart. She moved through the club like a woman trying to outrun humiliation. She let strangers look. She let the music shake through her chest. She let the first glass become the second, and the second become the third. She danced with nobody. She smiled at nothing. She almost laughed once, but it broke halfway out of her mouth. Upstairs, but in a section hidden from most of the room, a man in a black suit sat with the kind of stillness that made everyone around him nervous. Declan Wolfe didn't need to raise his voice to control a room. He only had to exist in it. His name was attached to too many things no one could prove, and too many favors no one could repay. He had money that moved without explanation, men who followed him without question, and enemies who disappeared without public discussion. He was not a politician, not a celebrity, not a man who needed cameras. But powerful people knew him, feared him, needed him. And that night, out of all the women in that club trying to get his attention, the only one he looked at was the married woman with heartbreak in her eyes and destruction in her hands. He watched Amelia the way predators watch storms, and not because they are afraid of them, because they understand them. He noticed the ring on her finger. He noticed the way she kept checking her phone, only to lock it again. He noticed that she was not flirting. She was unraveling, and something about that made him stand. Then the next blow landed. Amelia had just turned away from the bar when she saw them, Grant and Vanessa, walking into the same club, together, bold enough to be seen, careless enough to laugh. For a second, Amelia actually thought she was hallucinating, that her mind had become so damaged in one night it was now inventing fresh ways to hurt her. But no. There he was, her husband, adjusting his cufflinks like nothing had happened. Vanessa beside him in a sleek dress, hand on his arm, already carrying herself like the replacement wife she believed she was about to become. Amelia stood frozen. Grant looked up. Their eyes met, and for the first time that night, he looked afraid. Not ashamed. Afraid. Because he knew exactly what it meant to find his wife there, alone, dressed like Heartbreak, looking at him like a stranger. Vanessa saw Amelia too, and instead of stepping back, she leaned closer to Grant, as if to make the insult complete. That was when Amelia stopped thinking. That was when she turned too quickly, her heel caught, and she stumbled hard into a solid wall of muscle and tailored black fabric. A hand closed around her waist before she could hit the floor. Strong, steady, possessive before permission. Amelia looked up, dazed, breathless, furious, and found herself staring into the cold grey eyes of Declan Wolfe. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Her hand was still gripping his shirt, and his hand was still at her waist. Around them, the room had gone quiet in the way rooms do when everyone senses something important is about to happen. Amelia didn't know what came over her first: rage, humiliation, alcohol, instinct, or the desperate need to make the man who betrayed her feel even one fraction of what he had just done to her. Maybe it was all of it at once. She looked past Declan's shoulder and saw Grant taking a step towards them, panic already in his face. And that was enough. Amelia tightened her fist in Declan's shirt, pulled him down, and kissed him. Not gently, not carefully, not like a woman asking permission, like a woman setting fire to the last bridge behind her. The kiss lasted only seconds, but in those seconds the entire room changed. Grant stopped moving. Vanessa's smug expression vanished. Every man near Declan looked ready to intervene, but no one dared. Because Declan Wolfe didn't shove Amelia away. He didn't freeze. He didn't laugh. He looked at her for half a heartbeat, like he was deciding whether this was madness or fate. And then he kissed her back. Slow, controlled, deliberate. The kind of kiss that said he understood exactly what she was doing and intended to make sure nobody in that room ever forgot it. When he finally pulled back, Amelia's breathing was uneven, her lips trembling, her eyes wide with the realization of what she had just done. Declan's thumb brushed once against her jaw. Then he leaned close enough that only she could hear him and said, "Careful, sweetheart. Men like me don't let go once they've been chosen." If Amelia had been sober, she might have stepped back. She might have apologized, or she might have run. But heartbreak mixed with humiliation creates its own kind of courage, and Amelia had crossed too many lines in one night to retreat now. She looked over Declan's shoulder at Grant, who was already pushing through the crowd with anger and panic, fighting for control of his face. Grant was not the kind of man who liked being embarrassed, and he had just watched his wife kiss the one man powerful enough to ruin him without raising a hand. He reached Amelia first, but he never got to touch her. One of Declan's men stepped in front of him so fast it looked effortless. Grant snapped Amelia's name like he still owned it. Amelia. What the hell are you doing? She looked at him for a long second, then smiled in a way that made him flinch. Something I should have done a long time ago, she said. Grant tried to step around the guard, tried to act outraged, tried to regain control by becoming louder, but it was too late. Everyone had seen. Everyone had understood. The cheating husband, the mistress, the wife, the kiss, the man she chose to make a statement with. And Declan, standing beside Amelia with one hand still resting at the small of her back, looked at Grant the way kings look at men who have already lost and simply haven't accepted it yet. Then Declan said the sentence that would follow Grant Mercer for months. If you raise your voice at her again, you won't like how this night ends. Grant went pale, not because of the threat itself, because he believed it. What happened next would become the part of the story people argued about later. Some said Amelia was reckless. Some said she was brave. Some said she was using Declan. But others said Declan had already decided the outcome the moment she looked at him. The truth was more complicated. Amelia tried to pull away first. The adrenaline was fading. Reality was returning. Her hands were shaking now, not from rage, but from the realization that she had just kissed a man whose reputation could make seasoned executives lose sleep. She took one step back and almost lost her balance again. Declan caught her a second time, steadier now, his expression unreadable. "You're in no condition to leave alone," he told her. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an invitation either. It was a fact. Amelia opened her mouth to argue, but Grant interrupted, suddenly desperate. "Don't go with him. Amelia, listen to me. We can fix this." That was the moment Declan finally looked amused. "Fix this," he repeated, almost softly, though as if tasting the lie. Then he turned his eyes back to Amelia, and his voice changed again. Lower, calmer, dangerously gentle. "You can stay here and let him keep humiliating you, or you can walk away with me and let him understand what losing you feels like." For the first time all night, Amelia didn't feel helpless. She did not feel discarded. She did not feel like a wife begging to be respected in her own marriage. She felt wanted, seen, protected. And that was far more intoxicating than the alcohol. So she made the decision that would destroy her old life and open the door to a new one she could not yet imagine. She took Declan Wolfe's hand. Grant called after her. Vanessa stood there in stunned silence. The crowd parted, and Amelia walked out of that club beside a man she had known for less than 5 minutes, and somehow trusted more in that moment than the husband she had spent years defending. That should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like relief. But the truth, the part Amelia would only understand later, was that Declan Wolfe had not become interested in her because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she kissed him, though that alone would have made most men obsessed. He became interested in her because he recognized something in her that powerful men always notice when they are smart enough to survive. A woman who had just been broken in public and chose not to beg. A woman who had every reason to collapse and instead turned her pain into a weapon. A woman who could be humiliated, but not owned. And once a man like Declan Wolfe sees that kind of woman, the story is never simple again. Because Amelia thought she was borrowing his power for one night. She thought she was using him to punish a cheating husband. She thought that kiss was an act of revenge. She had no idea she had just stepped into a game that was already bigger than her marriage. She had no idea that by sunrise, Grant Mercer would be on the verge of losing everything he spent years building. Vanessa Cole would discover just how fast a woman can fall when the wrong man decides she should. And Declan Wolfe would make a private decision that no one around him dared question. He wanted Amelia Hart. Not for a night. Not as a passing distraction. Not as a scandal. He wanted her in the quiet, a dangerous way men like him want anything they believe should have been theirs sooner. And the worst part? Somewhere under the alcohol, the heartbreak, and the chaos, Amelia already felt it. That terrifying certainty, that strange pull, that sense that the moment she grabbed his shirt and kissed him, something had shifted that could never be undone. When the elevator doors closed behind them, Amelia finally let herself breathe, and even then, it came out unsteady. She looked at her reflection in the mirrored wall and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her lipstick was ruined. Her hair had fallen loose. Her wedding ring was gone. The anniversary gift she bought for a man who betrayed her was still lying shattered on the bedroom floor of a home that no longer felt like hers. Standing beside her, Declan remained silent. But it was the kind of silence that says more than conversation ever could. Amelia could feel his attention on her without him needing to touch her. She could feel the weight of what had just happened settling in. Then, almost in a whisper, she asked the question any sane person would have asked. "Why did you let me do that?" Declan looked at her reflection rather than her face. "Because you needed someone to catch you," he said. Then, after a pause that made her heart beat harder than it should have, he added, "And because I wanted to know what it would feel like." Amelia turned to look at him fully then, and in that moment she understood something dangerous. This man was not playing. Whatever happened next, whatever story people would tell later, whatever mess her husband had started, and whatever consequences were already moving in the dark around them, Declan Wolfe had made up his mind about one thing. The kiss was not a mistake. It was a beginning. By the time Amelia opened her eyes the next morning, the alcohol had faded, but the memory had not. For one disorienting second, she thought she had dreamed the entire night. The club, the betrayal, the kiss, the look on Grant's face when she walked away, holding another man's hand. Then she sat up and realized she was not in her own bed, not in her own home, and not in any place she recognized. The room around her was quiet, elegant, and unsettling in the kind of way only very expensive spaces can be. The sheets were untouched except where she had slept. Her dress had been carefully draped over a chair. Her heels sat side by side on the floor. On the nightstand beside her was a glass of water, pain medicine, and a folded note written in a sharp, controlled hand. Amelia reached for it with trembling fingers and unfolded it slowly. It said, "You needed rest, not questions. Drink the water. Take the medicine. Breakfast is downstairs when you're ready. No one will disturb you unless you ask." "Dee." Amelia stared at the note longer than she meant to. There was no smugness in it. No suggestion that he expected gratitude. No attempt to turn the night into something ugly. Just certainty. Order. Care. And somehow, that made the memory of his hand at her waist feel even more dangerous than it had in the moment. She stood, moved carefully, and checked herself in the mirror, expecting to find signs of a mistake she would have to regret. But there were none. Her makeup was mostly gone. Her hair was a mess. Her mouth was dry. Yet everything else was exactly as she had left it. There had been no attempt to take advantage of her. No evidence that Declan Wolfe had touched her beyond what was necessary to keep her upright and get her safely through the night. That realization hit Amelia harder than she expected. For months, maybe longer, she had lived with a man who made her question her instincts, her worth, and her sanity. In one night, a stranger with a reputation sharp enough to cut through entire industries had shown her more restraint than the husband who vowed to honor her. She swallowed hard and reached for her phone. It lit up like an emergency signal. 23 missed calls from Grant, 9 voicemails, 17 text messages. The 4 from unknown numbers she guessed belonged to Vanessa. One from her mother, asking if everything was okay, because Grant had called her at 2 in the morning. Amelia closed her eyes. Grant had not just betrayed her. He was already trying to control the story. That was exactly what men like him did when they realized they were losing. They rushed to rewrite reality before the woman they hurt had a chance to speak for herself. She opened the messages one by one. "Please call me. You're overreacting. We can explain this. Don't let people think the wrong thing. Do you have any idea who you were with? Amelia, answer me right now. This will ruin everything." That last message made her smile, though it held no joy, because for the first time since the night before, she realized something simple and powerful. Grant was terrified, not of losing her. Not truly. He was terrified of consequences. When Amelia finally stepped downstairs, she found Declan in a sunlit dining room that somehow managed to feel colder than most people's winter. He was seated at the head of a long table, not because he needed the distance, but because men like him were used to rooms arranging themselves around their presence. He was dressed already, sharp and immaculate, as if he had slept only enough to remain dangerous. A cup of black coffee sat near his hand. He looked up when she entered, and that steady grey gaze landed on her with the same unnerving calm it had the night before. No smile, no apology, no assumption, just attention. "Sit," he said, and the word should have sounded controlling, but it didn't. It sounded like an offer wrapped in confidence. Amelia sat. Oh, there was already breakfast waiting. Fresh fruit, toast, eggs, tea. Not random choices. The exact kind of breakfast she preferred. She noticed that immediately, and her pulse betrayed her before her face could. "How did you know what I liked?" she asked before she could stop herself. Declan took a sip of coffee, then set the cup down with maddening calm. "You ordered the same thing at the Eastern Charity Gala in March," he said. Amelia stared. She remembered that event. She remembered feeling lonely while standing beside Grant in a silver dress he had barely looked at. She remembered the waiter, the tray, the tea. But she did not remember seeing Declan there. "You remember that?" she asked. "I remember everything I decide matters," he replied. And just like that, the room became too warm for her to sit comfortably in it. That should have been the moment Amelia ran. That should have been the moment she thanked him politely, left with her dignity, and never let herself get pulled any deeper into the orbit of a man whose interest felt less like attraction and more like a decision. But grief doesn't make people sensible. Betrayal doesn't make them cautious. It makes them ache for something solid, something clear, something that feels stronger than the humiliation they have just endured. Declan Wolfe was many things Amelia should have avoided, but he was clear. There was no pretending with him, no games dressed up as misunderstanding, no gaslighting, no carefully worded cruelty. When he looked at her, she did not feel invisible. When Grant looked at her, especially in the last year of their marriage, and she had often felt like furniture in a beautiful room he was already bored of, Declan, on the other hand, looked at her like he had already noticed every fracture and had not decided they made her less. "Your husband tried to come here last night," he said, after a pause. Amelia looked up sharply. What happened? Declan's expression did not change. He was told to leave. Amelia imagined Grant at the gates of a private estate, shouting, demanding, furious that the woman he had taken for granted was suddenly out of reach. The image was more satisfying than it should have been. "Did you hurt him?" she asked. "Not physically," Declan said. The way he answered made it clear there were other ways to hurt a man, and he was fluent in all of them. "Good," Amelia said, almost to herself. If that was when Declan leaned back slightly and watched her more closely. "You don't want revenge," he said. "No," Amelia replied, and this time her voice was steady. "I want justice." Declan's gaze darkened just enough to notice. "Sometimes," he said, "they look the same." After breakfast, Amelia left with a driver he insisted on sending, and returned not to the penthouse she once called home, but to the office of the attorney she had not spoken to in years. Her name was Lydia Barrett, and she was the kind of divorce lawyer wealthy men whispered about when they thought their wives might finally stop being patient. Lydia took one look at Amelia's face, the missing ring, the untouched phone clutched in her hand, and simply said, "Tell me everything." Amelia did. Not theatrically, not tearfully. She laid out the facts like evidence, because by then she understood that emotion would not save her. Documentation would. She told Lydia about the affair, the assistant, the discovery, the messages, the club, the public humiliation. Lydia listened without interrupting, then asked the question that would decide everything. "Do you want to preserve the marriage, or do you want to end it cleanly and make sure he never recovers from underestimating you?" Amelia did not hesitate. "I want out," she said. Lydia nodded once. "Then we move fast." And move fast they did. Amelia had always known Grant was controlling, but she had not fully understood how much of his power rested on the assumption that she would remain quiet. He had built parts of his empire using her social credibility, her networking, her emotional labor, her inherited connections through old family friends, and the polished image of a stable marriage that reassured investors. He had also made one critical mistake common to arrogant men who think their wives are too loyal to ever leave. He got sloppy. Over the next few hours, Amelia and Lydia began uncovering the shape of his carelessness. Expense accounts, hidden transfers, luxury gifts routed through business funds, an apartment lease linked to Vanessa under a shell company that tied back to Grant's office, private travel, off-book bonuses, patterns, lies. And suddenly the affair was no longer just betrayal. It was fraud adjacent. It was misuse. It was the kind of mess that could ruin a reputation in circles where perception was half the currency. Grant, meanwhile, made the worst possible choice. He came to Amelia's temporary hotel suite in person. Not alone. With Vanessa. It was arrogance, desperation, and stupidity all dressed in expensive clothes. He must have believed that if he could corner Amelia before the paperwork started moving, he could talk her down the way he always had before. He must have believed that tears, charm, and pressure would still work. What he did not understand was that women do not become dangerous the first time they are betrayed. They become dangerous the moment they stop hoping the betrayer will change. Amelia opened the door and found him standing there, hair perfectly styled, jaw tense, eyes red with either stress or manufactured remorse. Vanessa stood slightly behind him, dressed modestly for once, her expression carefully arranged into false regret. Amelia nearly laughed at the performance. "Please," Grant said immediately, though trying to push past the door before she invited him in. "We need to talk." Amelia did not move. "You brought her?" she asked, her voice so calm it unsettled him more than shouting would have. "She wanted to explain," he said. That was almost insulting enough to be funny. Vanessa stepped forward, lowering her gaze just enough to seem apologetic. "Mrs. Mercer, I never meant for this to happen." Amelia's eyes snapped to her. "Don't call me that." Vanessa froze. Grant tried again. "Amelia, last night was a disaster. We were drunk. It got out of hand." Amelia's face changed then, not with pain, but with clarity so sharp it made both of them uncomfortable. "You want to know what the real disaster was?" she asked. "It wasn't finding you in my bed. It was realizing I wasted years protecting a man too weak to tell the truth and too arrogant to think I'd ever leave." Grant's mouth tightened. Vanessa looked at him, and for the first time, Amelia saw it. The crack between them. Affairs feel exciting in secrecy. Under pressure, they often reveal what they really are. Two selfish people with no idea how to survive exposure. Grant made the mistake of trying to reclaim authority. He stepped closer, lowered his voice, and said, "Enough. Whatever happened, you do not get to make a public spectacle of my life. My life. Not our marriage. Not what I did to you. My life." Amelia felt something in her go completely still. Then she smiled, and it was the kind of smile that makes liars uncomfortable, because it means the woman in front of them is no longer negotiating from heartbreak. "What your life?" she said softly. "You used company funds to pay for her apartment. You gave her jewelry through accounts tied to your firm. You traveled with her under fake business meetings. And you did all of that while letting me host dinners for your investors in the home you were turning into a joke." Grant's face drained. Vanessa turned toward him in visible panic. "What is she talking about?" Vanessa asked. Grant snapped at her too quickly. "Be quiet." There it was. Another crack. Amelia saw it and pressed harder. "Did you tell her," Amelia asked, "that if this gets audited, she goes down with you?" Vanessa stared at Grant, as if seeing him for the first time. It was almost poetic. The mistress who thought she was winning had just discovered she might actually be collateral. "Amelia," Grant said, voice tightening. "Oh, don't do this." Amelia leaned against the doorframe, suddenly calmer than she had felt in months. "I'm already doing it." Then she handed him an envelope. He opened it with shaking hands. Inside were the first divorce papers. Grant looked up at her, as if he had just been slapped. "You filed?" he asked, genuinely stunned. Amelia's answer was simple. "No, Grant. I survived." If the story had ended there, it would have been satisfying enough. A cheating husband exposed, a betrayed wife walking away, a mistress realizing she had attached herself to the wrong man. But that was only the beginning, because the moment Grant realized Amelia was serious, he became the version of himself she had spent years almost seeing and then forcing herself to ignore. Petty, vindictive, desperate. Within 24 hours, and whispers began moving through their social circle, that Amelia had been unstable for months, that she had become emotionally volatile, that the club incident had been proof she was reckless, that Grant had tried to save the marriage, but Amelia had become involved with a dangerous man. The strategy was obvious. If he could not stop the divorce, he would try to stain her credibility before she spoke publicly. It might even have worked, if not for one fact Grant had fatally underestimated. He was not the only person in this city who understood influence. And unlike Grant, Declan Wolfe did not need to ask anyone to believe him. He simply shifted the ground under people's feet until their loyalty rearranged itself. The first sign came 2 days later, when a major investor abruptly postponed a deal Grant had been celebrating for months. Or then a board member stopped returning his calls. Then a charity gala invitation, was quietly rescinded. Then a private banking contact he had relied on for years suddenly became unavailable. By the end of the week, Grant's office was running on caffeine, panic, and denial. No one said Declan's name out loud. No one needed to. The city had a way of understanding power without requiring public explanation. Amelia noticed it too, though Declan never bragged about it. If anything, that made it more unnerving. He called only once that first week, late in the evening, when she was sitting alone in the hotel suite, reading through financial documents that made her stomach turn. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Not hello, not small talk, just the question that mattered. Amelia surprised herself by answering honestly. "I'm angry enough to stay awake, tired enough to cry, and too proud to do either in front of anyone." There was a pause on the line, and then Declan let out the faintest sound that might have been amusement. "Good," he said. "Why is that good?" Amelia asked. "Because grief makes people hesitate," he replied. "Anger makes them finish what they start." She should have told him not to talk to her like he knew her. She should have asked why he cared. Instead, she found herself leaning back against the couch, closing her eyes, and listening to his silence as if it were something solid enough to hold on to. "Did you do this to him?" she asked finally. Another pause. "I don't know what you mean." It was such a deliberate non-answer that Amelia almost smiled. "That means yes." Declan's voice dropped lower. "No. It means he's learning what happens when a man confuses having access to a woman with deserving her." Amelia went quiet. No one had ever spoken about her like that before, not even in romance, especially not in marriage. She was used to being appreciated for what she gave, how she hosted, how she helped, how she supported. Declan spoke as if her value existed independent of service, as if losing her was not a sentimental tragedy, but a strategic disaster. And perhaps that was why, even when she told herself she should keep her distance, she found herself waiting for his calls. Grant's collapse didn't happen all at once. Men like him rarely fall in one dramatic moment. They unravel in layers, each one more humiliating than the last. First came the financial pressure, then came the social distance, then came the private rage. He started showing up where Amelia didn't expect him, outside her attorney's office, near the hotel lobby. Once in the parking structure after a consultation, where he cornered her between two columns and dropped the polished act entirely. "You think this makes you powerful?" he hissed. "You think sleeping with that man scares me?" Amelia stared at him, unflinching. "I didn't sleep with him," she said. Grant blinked. The answer clearly unsettled him more than if she had said yes. Because if she had not given herself to Declan, and he was still interfering this much, then Grant had a worse problem than jealousy. He had a man interested in her for reasons deeper than possession alone. "Then why is he doing this?" Grant demanded. Amelia looked at him for a long moment, then said the truth that wounded him most. "It's because he can." Grant's jaw clenched. "Come home," he said suddenly, and the switch was so abrupt it would have been absurd if it weren't so pathetic. "I'll end it. I'll fix it. I'll do whatever you want." Amelia's expression didn't change. "You had years to choose me without being forced," she said. "Now you're just panicking because someone else did." Grant grabbed her wrist. It happened fast. Too fast for him to think. Too fast for her to react. But not too fast for the man standing at the far end of the garage to notice. Declan did not shout. He did not run. He simply appeared with the kind of terrifying calm that makes violence unnecessary. 1 second, Grant had Amelia's wrist in his hand. The next, Declan was there, close enough that the air itself seemed to harden. "Take your hand off her," he said, quietly. Grant did, instantly, what Amelia had never seen fear move that quickly through a grown man. Grant stepped back, trying to recover dignity that was already gone. "This is between my wife and me," he snapped. Declan's eyes never left his face. "No," he said. "Your wife was the woman you betrayed in your bed. The woman standing here is the one you no longer have." Amelia felt those words like a current under her skin. Not because they were possessive, though they were. Not because they were harsh, though they were. But because they were true. Grant looked at Amelia then, really looked, and saw it. The distance, the finality. The fact that the woman who once would have defended him had become someone else. "You're really going to let him speak for you?" Grant asked, bitterly. Amelia lifted her chin. "No," she said. "Yet I'm just enjoying the first conversation in months, where I don't have to beg to be respected." Declan's gaze shifted to her for a fraction of a second, and something unreadable passed through it. Approval? Desire? Maybe both. Grant noticed it too, and whatever hope he had been clinging to began to rot right there in front of her. He muttered something under his breath and backed away. Declan watched until he was gone, then turned to Amelia. His thumb brushed lightly over the faint red mark on her wrist. "Did he hurt you?" he asked. It was such a simple question, yet it landed with more tenderness than any apology Grant had offered in years. "No," Amelia said softly. "Not this time." By the second week, Vanessa began to understand that being the other woman only feels glamorous until the spotlight shifts. Where she had spent months enjoying secret dinners, designer gifts, private trips disguised as business, and the thrill of believing she had outplayed a wife who seemed too elegant and too trusting to notice what was happening right in front of her. But now the affair was exposed, the divorce was real, the finances were under scrutiny, and Grant was no longer a charming executive, sneaking away between meetings. He was a drowning man, looking for someone lighter than himself to throw overboard. Amelia learned through Lydia that Grant's team was already trying to separate certain expenses from official records, quietly shifting blame wherever possible. Vanessa's name appeared more and more often. Bonuses, reimbursements, transfers, lease agreements. Grant was not protecting her. He was building a case around her. And when Vanessa realized that, she did what desperate people always do. She came to Amelia alone. It was late afternoon when the hotel called upstairs and said a woman was demanding to see her. Amelia almost said no. Then she thought better of it. "Send her up." Vanessa entered, looking polished but strained, like someone who had spent the morning pretending nothing was wrong, and the afternoon realizing everything was. She stood in the center of the suite, twisting her fingers together, and for the first time since Amelia had known her, there was no smugness left. "Please," Vanessa said, "I need your help." Amelia almost admired the audacity. "What exactly do you think I owe you?" Amelia asked, not cruelly, just honestly. Vanessa's eyes filled, but Amelia no longer trusted tears from women who had smiled in her bedroom. "I didn't know he was doing all that with the company money," Vanessa said. "I thought the apartment was personal. I thought the gifts were personal. He said—" Amelia cut her off with a raised hand. "He said a lot of things," she replied. "He also said you were just efficient." Vanessa flinched. "Good. He's blaming me," Vanessa whispered. "He says if this goes public, he'll make it look like I manipulated him, that I pressured him, that I used him." Amelia looked at her for a long moment. There was a strange kind of justice in it, ugly but real. The woman who had helped destroy her marriage was now discovering the man she thought she had won was exactly who Amelia had finally accepted he was. Weak when exposed, cruel when cornered, loyal only to himself. "And what do you want from me?" Amelia asked. Vanessa's voice shook. "I want you to tell your lawyer I didn't know. I want you to say I wasn't involved." Amelia stood slowly and walked closer until Vanessa had no choice but to meet her eyes. "You were involved," Amelia said. "Maybe not in every transaction. Maybe not in every lie. But you walked into my home, sat at my table, accepted my kindness, and slept with my husband while looking me in the face. You were involved from the moment you decided my pain was worth your ambition." Vanessa started crying then, real tears now, messy and desperate. "I'm sorry," she said. "Please, I'm so sorry." Amelia's face remained unreadable. "I believe you're sorry now," she said. "What I just don't believe you were sorry when it mattered." The city's elite got the confirmation they had been waiting for a few nights later at a black tie charity event neither Grant nor Amelia could afford to skip without making the rumors worse. Everyone attended: investors, socialites, board members, quietly corrupt philanthropists pretending to be generous for cameras. It was exactly the kind of room where reputations were polished and ruined in the same hour. Grant arrived alone, which told Amelia two things immediately. First, Vanessa was no longer safe enough to be seen. Second, he still believed he could repair appearances if he performed well enough. Amelia arrived 10 minutes later, in a gown that was not flashy, but devastatingly elegant. The kind that made people realize too late that the woman they had underestimated was still very much in control. She entered on her own, chin high, shoulders steady, and for the first time in weeks, the whispers weren't pitying. They were curious. Then the room changed. Not because she stumbled, not because she cried, because a hand appeared at the small of her back, warm and steady, and the entire crowd turned to see who had touched her. Declan Wolfe. He had not announced himself. Men like him never needed to. He was simply there, beside her, dressed in black, calm as ever, looking at the room like it was an inconvenience. Amelia had not known he would come. He had not asked permission. Yet the second she felt him beside her, she understood exactly what he was doing. He was not escorting her. He was making a statement. Not loud, not vulgar, just undeniable. And in a city obsessed with status, nothing is more humiliating than being publicly replaced by a man no one dares challenge. Grant saw them from across the ballroom, and whatever remained of his composure cracked. He crossed the room too quickly, forcing smiles at people he nearly shoved aside, and stopped in front of them with the rigid posture of a man trying not to unravel in public. "Amelia," he said, too sharply, "can we speak privately?" Declan answered before she could. "No." Grant's eyes flashed. "I wasn't talking to you." Declan tilted his head slightly, as if mildly bored. "And yet, here I am." Amelia would have laughed if the tension weren't so sharp. Grant turned back to her, dropping his voice. "Please don't do this here." That line almost made her pity him. Almost. "Do what?" Amelia asked. "Stand next to someone who doesn't lie to me?" Grant's face hardened. "You're humiliating me." Amelia looked at him for a long second, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only those closest could hear. "No, Grant. I found you in bed with another woman wearing my robe. You humiliated yourself. I'm just refusing to hide the evidence." The silence that followed was so complete it felt staged. Several people nearby pretended not to listen while listening to every word. Grant swallowed, pride and panic choking him at the same time. "I made a mistake," he said. And there it was again, that maddening attempt to reduce months of betrayal into a single accident. Amelia's eyes sharpened. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary," she said. "You built a second life and expected me to thank you for the leftovers." Then, not because some endings deserve witnesses, she reached into a clutch, removed a folded copy of the finalized filing notice, and placed it in his hand, right there in the ballroom. "You've been served officially now," she said, in case denial was getting expensive. What happened next was the moment people would talk about for months. Grant looked down at the papers as if they were written in another language. Then he looked up at Amelia, and whatever pride he had been protecting finally collapsed under the weight of public shame, fear, and the realization that she was truly gone. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He did something worse. He begged. Right there in the ballroom, under crystal lights and polite horror, Grant Mercer reached for Amelia's hand with both of his and said the words she had once ached to hear, or now rendered useless by timing. "Please don't do this. I love you. I'll fix it. I'll end everything. I'll be whoever you want. Just don't leave me like this." Amelia looked at him and felt nothing. Not hatred. Not triumph. Just distance. The kind that comes when grief has finally finished its work. "You don't love me," she said softly. "You miss what I did for you. You miss the version of yourself you got to be when I stood beside you. You miss access. You miss comfort. You miss the woman who made you look like a good man." Grant's face crumpled. Around them, the room remained frozen, not because of the scandal anymore, but because every person watching knew they were witnessing something rare. The exact moment a woman stopped being emotionally available to the man who broke her. As Grant's knees bent, as if his body gave out before his pride could stop it, he actually dropped low enough to look like he might kneel. Amelia stepped back before he could, not out of fear, out of refusal. She would not let him turn repentance into theatre. And that was when Declan, who had remained silent through all of it, finally placed his hand over Amelia's lower back and said in a voice calm enough to be lethal, "We're done here." Amelia should have felt guilty walking away, while Grant stood shattered in the center of the room. She expected some old instinct to pull at her, some lingering softness, some ache for the years they had shared. Instead, what she felt was relief so powerful it nearly made her dizzy. Relief that she no longer had to explain herself. Relief that she no longer had to shrink to preserve someone else's comfort. That relief that the woman who entered that ballroom had not been Grant Mercer's wife. She had been herself. Outside, once the doors closed behind them and the noise of the event faded into the distance, Amelia finally exhaled fully. "That was cruel," she said after a long silence. Declan glanced down at her. "To whom?" he asked. Amelia almost smiled. "To him." Declan's answer came without hesitation. "He mistook your kindness for permanence. Men like that only understand loss when it becomes public." Amelia looked ahead, but she could feel him watching her. "Did you come tonight to rescue me?" she asked quietly. "Or to make sure everyone knew I was no longer his?" Declan's mouth curved just slightly, not enough to call it a smile. "Both." The honesty of it sent a heat through her she refused to examine too closely. He opened the car door for her, but before she got in, he touched her chin lightly and made her look at him. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I know," she replied. "Good," he said, "because I didn't do it for gratitude." And that was the moment Amelia realized the most dangerous part of Declan Wolfe was not his power, his reputation, or even the way other men stepped aside when he entered a room. It was the way he could say something possessive enough to make her pulse race and still leave her feeling more respected than she had in years. But the story was not finished. It was only getting sharper. Because while Grant was collapsing in public and Vanessa was learning what it meant to be disposable, Amelia was beginning to understand that walking away from a marriage was one thing. Surviving what came after was another. The divorce battle was now fully underway. Financial investigations were tightening. Social alliances were shifting. The press had not caught the full story yet, but rumors were spreading fast enough to become dangerous. And beneath all of that, something even more complicated was growing between Amelia and the man she had kissed in anger. She told herself it was temporary, a protective arrangement, a strange chapter born from an ugly ending. But every time Declan called, every time he remembered something small she had said, every time he looked at her like she was not broken, but chosen, that explanation became harder to believe. Because Amelia Hart had not simply embarrassed her cheating husband and started a divorce. She had done something far more irreversible. She had stepped into the orbit of a man who never pursued anything halfway. A man who had watched her at her lowest and seen not weakness, but value. A man who had quietly started dismantling the world of the husband who betrayed her, not because she asked, but because someone had hurt what he was beginning to consider his. And before Amelia could decide whether that thought terrified her or thrilled her, Declan Wolfe would make her an offer that would change everything. Not a gift, not a favor, not a night of comfort. An offer that would force her to answer the one question she had been avoiding since the moment she grabbed his shirt in that club and kissed him in front of the man who betrayed her. Was she using the Mafia boss to survive the ruins of her old life? Or was she already falling for the only man dangerous enough to make her feel safe? There are some moments in a woman's life that arrive quietly, but change everything forever. Not the loud moments people expect, not the public scenes, the tears, the betrayals, the confrontations under bright lights. Those matter, of course. But the real turning points are often quieter. A look that lasts too long. A silence that feels safer than words. A hand at the small of your back that should feel dangerous, but instead feels like the first honest thing you have touched in years. That was where Amelia found herself in the days after Grant Mercer's public collapse. The scandal had already spread through every circle that mattered. Investors were pulling away. No friends were choosing sides. Vanessa Cole had vanished from the events she once floated through with smug confidence. And Grant, the man who once believed his wife would endure anything so long as he gave her the right excuses, was learning in real time what it meant to lose not just a marriage, but the woman who had made his life look complete. But for Amelia, the more difficult truth was no longer the divorce. It was Declan Wolfe. Because, while her old life was crumbling exactly as it deserved to, the man she had kissed in a moment of heartbreak was becoming harder to define and impossible to ignore. He did not chase her with flowers, endless messages, or shallow declarations. Men like Declan did not plead for attention. They made space and waited to see whether a woman was wise enough to step into it. And that was exactly what made him so hard to resist. The first real shift happened on a night Amelia told herself she was too tired to see him. Lydia had spent hours with her going over financial disclosures, hidden assets, and the kind of legal maneuvering wealthy men use when they believe money can soften consequences. By the time Amelia returned to the hotel, she was exhausted in the deep, emotional way that comes from untangling years of deception. She had just kicked off her heels when her phone lit up with a message from Declan. "Come downstairs." No greeting. No explanation. No request. Just certainty. Amelia stared at the screen longer than she should have. Another man sending a message like that would have annoyed her. From Declan it sent a pulse through her body she hated herself for noticing. She should have ignored it. Or she should have demanded context. Instead, 10 minutes later, she was in the elevator, smoothing down a simple black dress and wondering why her heart was beating faster than it should. When the doors opened, she found him leaning against a sleek black car outside the hotel entrance, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable, as if he had always known she would come. "What is this?" she asked, trying to sound unimpressed. "Dinner," he said. I didn't say yes. Declan's gaze moved slowly over her, not disrespectfully, but in a way that made her feel entirely seen. "You came downstairs," he replied. Amelia hated how effective that answer was. "You always this arrogant?" she asked. "Only when I'm right," he said. And before she could stop herself, she smiled. But that night was the first time Amelia understood the full danger of a man like Declan Wolfe. Not because of what he did, because of what he didn't do. He didn't pressure her. He didn't crowd her. He didn't try to turn the dinner into some dramatic seduction she would later have to question. Instead, he took her to a private rooftop restaurant closed to everyone else, where the city spread out below them in gold and glass, and treated her not like a broken woman in need of rescue, but like someone whose company he had deliberately chosen. He knew what wine she liked, but ordered tea when he noticed she was tired. He changed the subject when she stiffened at the mention of business. He listened when she spoke. Really listened, the kind that makes a woman aware of how rarely she has been heard. At one point, Amelia asked the question that had been circling her mind for days. "Why me?" It came out softer than she intended. She expected a flirtatious answer, a line, something charming and easy. Declan looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Because the first time I noticed you, you were standing beside a man who didn't deserve to be near you," he said. Amelia's breath caught. He continued before she could recover. "Because every room you walked into, people watched him when they should have been watching you. Because I saw the way you smiled when you were tired, the way you covered for his rudeness without making him look small, and the way your eyes went quiet every time he interrupted you. I wanted to know what kind of man could have that and still look elsewhere." Amelia could not speak. It was too intimate, too observant, or too accurate. And that was the moment she understood Declan had not become interested in her the night of the kiss. He had already been paying attention. For a woman coming out of betrayal, attention can feel like oxygen, but it can also feel like danger. Amelia knew that. She told herself that. She repeated it in the silence after that dinner as Declan drove her back to the hotel. When he parked, neither of them moved right away. The city hummed around them. The lights from the dashboard painted his face in quiet angles. "You should be careful with me," Amelia said finally, looking straight ahead. Declan didn't answer at first. Then he turned slightly toward her and asked, "Are you warning me or yourself?" Amelia swallowed. "Both." Declan's mouth shifted with the faintest hint of a smile. "Good," he said. "Why is that good?" she asked. "What, because if you weren't afraid," he replied, "I'd think you weren't paying attention." Then, slowly, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It was such a small touch, but after months of being treated like an obligation and weeks of being treated like evidence, it nearly undid her. "I'm not interested in being your rebound," Declan said, voice low. "And I'm not interested in being your mistake. "If I touch you again, Amelia, it will be because you know exactly what you're choosing." That should have made it easier. It should have given her distance. Instead, it made him even more impossible to dismiss. Because in a world where men like Grant took and lied and expected forgiveness later, Declan was offering restraint and calling it respect. Amelia got out of the car before she said something foolish. But she went to bed that night knowing the truth. She was already in trouble. Grant, meanwhile, was running out of places to hide. The divorce proceedings had moved from private humiliation into strategic warfare. Lydia had found enough evidence to paint a devastating picture, and the more pressure mounted, the more Grant began making mistakes. He lashed out at colleagues. He blamed staff. He privately threatened Vanessa, then publicly distanced himself from her. He tried to salvage sympathy by framing himself as a man who had simply lost control during a difficult marriage. It would have worked better if Amelia had not spent years quietly building trust in every room he now needed. One by one, people started remembering who had really hosted the dinners, managed the social obligations, soothed offended clients, remembered birthdays, that rescued awkward meetings and made Grant Mercer appear warmer than he had ever been naturally. Once that illusion cracked, it cracked hard. Amelia saw it in the way people approached her now, not with pity, but with recognition. They had not lost a social accessory. They had underestimated a central pillar. Declan noticed it too. "They're finally seeing what he stole from himself," he told her one evening. Amelia looked at him. "That sounds almost kind." Declan shook his head once. "It isn't. I'm enjoying it." And she believed him. More than that, she liked that she believed him. The moment the city understood Amelia was no longer merely surviving, but becoming untouchable, came at another public event, this one more intimate, more exclusive, and far more dangerous for Grant to attend. It was a private auction, hosted at an old estate where money moved quietly and alliances were measured by who sat next to whom. Amelia had not planned to go. Declan had. "You need to be seen," he told her. "As what?" she asked. "As a woman no one can discard and then gossip about, like she's still available for pity." The phrasing should have irritated her. Instead, it sent heat through her body in the most inconvenient way. He had a habit of sounding possessive and respectful at the same time, and Amelia was beginning to understand just how addictive that combination could be. She arrived in a dark gown that made half the room stop speaking. Declan met her at the entrance, took one look at her, and his jaw tightened just slightly. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "That's a lie," she replied, till Declan leaned in close enough that only she could hear. "I don't like how many men are about to look at you." Amelia's breath caught. "That sounds like a you problem." "It is," he said, "and I handle my problems." Then he offered her his arm. She took it before common sense could intervene. Inside, the tension was immediate. Grant was there. Of course he was. Men like him never knew when dignity required absence. He saw Amelia enter on Declan's arm, and something in his face twisted so sharply that several nearby guests noticed. But this time, he was not the only one watching. Whispers moved through the room with ruthless speed. "That's her. That's him." She really chose Wolfe. Grant's attorney, standing near the bar, visibly stiffened, because everyone in that room understood what public proximity to Declan meant. It meant protection. It meant influence. It meant that whatever story Grant had hoped to sell about Amelia being unstable or reckless had just become impossible to sustain. She did not look unstable. She looked radiant, controlled, desired. Declan guided her through the room, with the kind of calm that announced ownership without ever needing to say the word. He introduced her to people who mattered. He ignored people who didn't. When one silver-haired donor made a careless remark about how quickly she had moved on after such a public scandal, Declan's hand settled lightly at Amelia's waist, and his expression cooled several degrees. "She didn't move on quickly," he said. "She simply stopped wasting time." The donor laughed nervously. No one else did. Amelia felt the heat of his hand through the fabric of her dress and understood why people feared him. It wasn't just his reputation. It was the precision. The way he could defend without grandstanding. The way he made an insult feel like the insulter's mistake before they fully realized what had happened. Grant finally made his move midway through the evening. He intercepted Amelia near a corridor lined with portraits and antique mirrors, choosing a moment when Declan had been briefly pulled aside by a man asking for a private word. "You really are enjoying this, aren't you?" Grant said, voice low and brittle. Amelia did not flinch. "Enjoying what?" she asked. "Watching me suffer. Parading around with him. Acting like you were never my wife." Amelia studied him. He looked thinner, more tired. The polish was still there, but stress had started leaking through the cracks. "I was your wife," she said calmly. "That's the tragedy. Or you just didn't treat me like it until another man did." Grant's eyes flashed with anger and pain. "You think he loves you?" he snapped. "You think men like him love? He wants to own you." Amelia held his gaze. "That's rich coming from a man who only noticed my value once someone else refused to let me be humiliated." Grant stepped closer. "You don't know what he is." Amelia's voice dropped. "Neither do you. And that's why you're scared." For one second, Grant looked like he might say something reckless, something desperate, something that would expose more than either of them expected. But before he could, another voice entered the corridor like a blade sliding free. "She doesn't need to know what I am," Declan said, coming to stand beside Amelia. "She only needs to know what happens to people who forget how to speak to her." Grant took a step back. Amelia did not. Declan's hand found the small of her back, warm and steady. "This conversation is over," he said. Grant looked at Amelia one last time, as if searching for any sign of hesitation, any remaining softness, any chance at all. He found none. Then he walked away, and Amelia understood something final. The chapter with Grant was not just closing, it was over. Later that same night, after the auction ended and the estate had emptied of polite predators and wealthy voyeurs, Declan took Amelia to the terrace overlooking the city. The air was cool, the lights below stretched like a second sky. She had been carrying tension in her shoulders all evening, but standing beside him there, with the world far enough away to feel irrelevant, she felt it begin to loosen. "You keep doing that," she said after a while. "Doing what?" Declan asked. "Appearing exactly when I need you." Declan looked at her, and there was something in his expression then she had not seen before. Not softness exactly. Men like him didn't become soft the way others did. It was something more dangerous than softness. Intent. "I don't appear when you need me," he said quietly. "I stay close enough that I don't miss the moment." Amelia turned fully toward him. The honesty of that statement moved through her like heat. "That should scare me," she whispered. "Does it?" he asked. She held his gaze. "No." The silence that followed was heavy, charged, impossible to misunderstand. Then Declan stepped closer, not enough to trap her, just enough to let her decide. "Tell me to stop," he said. "Tell me you want distance, and I'll give it to you. I won't like it, but I'll give it." Amelia's heart was pounding so hard, She could feel it in her throat. She thought about Grant, about the years she spent being slowly diminished, about the club, about the kiss, about the way Declan had never once treated her pain like leverage, about how he looked at her like she was not a damaged thing to be pitied, but a woman worth choosing deliberately. And then, because some truths become impossible to avoid, Amelia closed the space between them and kissed him first. This time there was no audience, no cheating husband watching from across a room, no mistress, no need to make a statement. This kiss belonged only to the two of them, and it changed everything. And Declan kissed her back with the kind of control that made it even more intense, one hand sliding to her waist, the other framing her jaw like he was memorizing the shape of the moment. It was not rushed. It was not careless. It was the opposite of the kiss in the club. That first kiss had been fire thrown in anger. This one was choice. When they finally pulled apart, Amelia was breathless, and Declan's forehead rested briefly against hers. "That," he said, voice rougher than she had ever heard it, was a very different decision. Amelia's lips curved despite herself. "I know." Declan looked at her the way a starving man looks at a feast he intends to savor rather than consume. "Be very sure," he said. "I am," she replied. It was a dangerous answer. It was also the truth, because somewhere between the public humiliation, the legal war, the quiet dinners, the steady protection, and the unbearable tenderness hidden inside his control, Amelia had stopped asking whether she was falling. She already had. What followed should have been complicated, and in some ways, it was. Amelia was still legally in the final stages of divorce. The city was still watching. Declan's world was not clean, no matter how carefully he kept blood off the visible surfaces of his life. There were whispers around him. Men who obeyed too quickly. Meetings that happened at strange hours. People who lowered their voices when he entered. Yet in private, he was maddeningly simple. He called when he said he would. He showed up when he promised. He never lied to make himself easier to accept. If Amelia asked a question he could not answer fully, he told her exactly that. "There are things I can't tell you yet," he said once. And though another woman might have taken that as manipulation, Amelia understood the difference between secrecy, used to deceive, and silence used to protect. More importantly, he never tried to own her choices. He simply made his own intentions impossible to misread. "I don't share," he told her one night, when a charming banker lingered too long after an event. Amelia arched a brow. "I'm not a possession." Declan's eyes held hers. "No," he said. "You're the first woman in years who's made me understand why men ruin themselves over the wrong ones." Amelia should have had a better response than the silence that followed. She didn't. He had a way of saying outrageous things like facts, and somehow that made them harder to dismiss. And as weeks passed, what had begun as scandal turned into something much more destabilizing. They became inseparable. Vanessa's final collapse came not with elegance, but with desperation. Cornered by legal exposure, abandoned by Grant, and shut out from the social world she once thought she was climbing into, she tried one last gamble. She contacted a tabloid intermediary and attempted to sell a version of the story that painted Amelia as vindictive, Declan as predatory, and herself as a naive employee caught in the middle of a powerful couple's destruction. It might have become messy. It might have dragged on. It might have created enough public confusion to complicate Amelia's clean exit. But Vanessa had forgotten the one rule everyone eventually learns about men like Declan Wolfe. If they want something buried, it stays buried. Within 48 hours, the intermediary backed out. The tabloid lost interest. The lawyer Vanessa thought she had retained suddenly withdrew, and a quiet notice reached Lydia's office containing documents Vanessa had never expected anyone else to see. Messages, transfers, hotel bookings, timestamps, and enough evidence to make it very clear that if she pushed harder, she would be the one publicly destroyed. Amelia never asked how those documents surfaced. She did not need to. When she told Declan about it, he merely said, "Some people mistake desperation for leverage." Amelia studied him. "Did you threaten her?" Declan's expression did not change. "No." She waited. "I simply made sure she understood the math." That answer should have alarmed her more than it did. Instead, she found herself thinking the same dangerous thought she had been fighting for weeks. But for all the reasons she should stay away from him, there was something almost impossible to resist about being loved by a man who made cruelty toward you feel expensive. The divorce was finalized on a cold, bright morning that Amelia would remember for the rest of her life. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. There were no tears left by then, no speeches, no begging, no sudden confessions, just signatures, stamped documents, legal language, finality. Grant looked like a man who had not slept in months. He tried once, just once more, before they stood to leave. "We could have had everything," he said quietly, as if speaking to some ghost of the woman she used to be. Amelia looked at him, and for the first time since all of this began, she felt something close to gratitude. Not for what he had done. Never that. But for the lesson hidden inside it. "No," she said. "I gave you everything. You just didn't know what it was worth until it was gone." Then she turned and walked out. Declan was waiting outside. Of course he was. He did not ask what happened. He looked at her face once, read everything he needed, and opened the car door. Amelia got in without a word. Only when they were halfway across the city did he reach across the center console, take her left hand gently, and slide his thumb over the finger where her wedding ring used to be. "Free?" he asked. Amelia looked out the window for a long second, then back at him. "Free," she said. Declan's jaw tightened in a way she had learned meant he was restraining stronger emotion than he intended to show. "Good," he said, "because I'm done pretending patience is comfortable." Amelia laughed then. A real laugh, the kind that had been absent from her life for too long. "Is that your version of romance?" she asked. Declan's eyes flicked toward her. "No." He pulled the car into a private drive she did not recognize, cut the engine, and turned fully toward her. There was no ring in his hand, no orchestrated spectacle, no crowd, no flowers, just the man who had become impossible to ignore and the woman who had stopped wanting to. "This is my version of romance," he said. "I don't offer temporary things. I don't date casually. I don't circle around what I've already decided. If I put my hand on your back in public, it's because I mean to keep you safe. If I show up, it's because I intend to stay. If I ask for you, Amelia, it's because I've already imagined every version of life that follows, and the only one I want is the one where you're in it." Amelia's breath caught. He held her gaze and continued. "Marry me." Just like that. No long speech, no theatrics, just certainty so complete it felt like standing in front of a force of nature. Amelia stared at him. "You can't just say that like you're ordering dinner." "I can," Declan said. And I did. She should have laughed. She should have told him he was impossible. She should have asked for time. Instead, what came out was the question that mattered. "If I say no?" Declan looked at her with the kind of honesty that had become his most devastating trait. "I'll hate it," he said. "I'll still protect you. I'll still wait longer than I want to, and I'll still end up asking again. But I don't think you're going to say no." Amelia's pulse raced. "Oh, that's arrogance. That's observation," he replied. She did not answer him that day. Not because she wanted to punish him, because she needed one thing he had, to his credit, always given her when it mattered: space to choose. For 3 days, Amelia stayed with the question. She walked through the silence of her newly reclaimed life. She sat with the finality of the divorce. She looked at the city that had watched her fall apart and watched her stand back up. She thought about what it meant to marry a man like Declan Wolfe. The protection, the power, the danger, the certainty, the whispers that would never stop. The fact that some people would always assume she traded one controlling man for another because they were too shallow to understand the difference between possession and devotion. She thought about how Grant had wanted ownership without reverence. Declan wanted closeness without disrespect. Grant had wanted the benefits of a wife. Declan wanted the woman. By the 3rd night, she knew her answer. She went to Declan's house without calling first. His staff opened the gates as if they had been expecting her all along. Of course they had. He was in his study when she entered, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, a glass of something amber in his hand. He looked up once and set the glass down. "You took your time," he said. Amelia crossed the room slowly, stopped in front of him, and took the tie from around his neck into her own hands. "You're impossible," she said. "I know." Arrogant. Frequently. Possessive. Only when necessary. Amelia almost smiled. "And if I marry you?" Declan's eyes darkened. "Then no one will ever make the mistake of thinking you can be mistreated and keep breathing comfortably afterward." Her heart thudded hard. "That," she said, "is both romantic and mildly concerning. I'm a complicated man." Amelia held his gaze for one long, charged second. Then she said the words that changed everything. "Yes." The wedding was not a public spectacle. It was more dangerous than that. Quiet, private, exclusive. The kind of ceremony powerful people hold when they do not need the world's approval, because they already own too much of it. A historic estate outside the city. Candlelight, white flowers, black suits. A guest list so tightly controlled that even rumors about attendance were considered privileged information. Amelia wore a gown that made even hardened men look away for a second too long. Declan wore black, but of course, and looked like the kind of groom who could say vows and issue a threat in the same breath. Lydia was there. A few people Amelia trusted, a handful of men from Declan's world, whose faces gave away nothing, and whose loyalty was obvious in the way they positioned themselves without appearing to move. Grant was not invited, but word of the wedding still found him. It always would. Somewhere in the city, the man who had once believed Amelia would remain his by default was learning that the woman he betrayed was becoming untouchable by law, by choice, and by the protection of the one man he feared most. And if that thought ruined his sleep, no one around Amelia cared enough to mention it. When Amelia walked down the aisle, Declan did something no one expected. He lost composure. Not dramatically, or not enough for anyone else to fully understand what they were seeing. But Amelia saw it. The slight shift in his breathing, the tension in his jaw, the way his gaze fixed on her like he had reached the end of a long private war and was seeing the reward for surviving it. Men like Declan did not get overwhelmed easily. That was exactly why the moment mattered. When she reached him, his hand closed around hers, warm and firm, and for the first time all day she felt nervous. "You're shaking," he murmured so only she could hear. "I'm marrying a man people are afraid to say no to," she whispered back. "You said yes." Amelia looked at him. "That's what worries me." The corner of his mouth shifted. Too late. The vows were simple, but not soft. Amelia promised truth, loyalty, and partnership. Declan promised protection, honesty where possible, and a kind of devotion so intense it sounded almost like a warning. "I will not fail to stand between you and anything that tries to break what is mine to protect," he said. Some brides might have found that unsettling. Amelia found it devastatingly beautiful. When he slid the ring onto her finger, there was no sense of being owned in the way Grant had once tried to own her through assumption. This was different. This was being chosen with full awareness. This was a man making a vow not to possess her soul, but to honor the fact that she had entrusted it to him at all. If the story ended there, people would call it a dark fairy tale. The betrayed wife finds out her husband is cheating, kisses a dangerous man in a nightclub, destroys the marriage, humiliates the mistress, marries the Mafia boss, and lives in luxurious, possessive bliss. It would be satisfying. It would be romantic. It would be the kind of ending audiences crave because it punishes the right people and rewards the woman who finally stops settling. But real endings, especially in stories built around men like Declan Wolfe, rarely arrive cleanly. And the truth is, Amelia's real story didn't begin the day she caught Grant in bed. It didn't begin in the club. It did not even begin the day she said yes. It began the night she became Mrs. Amelia Wolfe, and discovered that the man she had married had not just chosen her. He had been haunted long before she ever stumbled into his arms. It happened after the ceremony, after the private dinner, after the toasts, after the final guests had gone, and the estate had fallen into that eerie kind of silence only very large houses can hold. Amelia should have been exhausted. Emotionally, she was. But something about becoming Declan's wife had sharpened her instincts instead of soothing them. Maybe it was the way several men from his circle had exchanged glances during the reception when certain names came up. Maybe it was the way an older woman she had not met before, elegant and severe, had kissed Declan on the cheek and looked at Amelia with an expression too complicated to call approval. Maybe it was the fact that marrying into a man's life always reveals corners you have not yet seen, no matter how much he has tried to protect you from them. Whatever it was, Amelia couldn't sleep. She slipped out of the bedroom while Declan took a call he had insisted was brief and wandered the quiet hallway until she found herself near the study he usually kept locked. Tonight, or perhaps because of the wedding, perhaps because his guard was lowered, the door was slightly open. Amelia hesitated. Then she pushed it wider. Inside, the room was dim and immaculate. Dark wood, leather, shelves lined with books and files, a desk so clean it looked almost staged. Amelia should have turned around. Instead, she stepped closer and noticed one drawer slightly ajar, as if someone had closed it too quickly. She opened it. At first, she saw only papers, then an old photograph, faded at the edges, creased from being handled too often. She lifted it slowly, and the blood in her body seemed to stop. The man in the photo was unmistakably Declan, younger, rougher, less controlled, his face harder and more openly dangerous than the one she knew now. There was blood on his shirt. His arm was wrapped protectively around a woman. What a beautiful woman. Dark hair, elegant features, wide eyes, and for one impossible, chilling second, Amelia thought she was looking at herself. Not exactly, but close enough to make her fingers go numb. The resemblance was not identical. It was worse than that. It was haunting. The shape of the face, the posture, the same steady gaze, the same kind of beauty that did not ask permission. Amelia turned the photograph over with trembling hands. On the back, written in Declan's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words that changed the temperature of the room. The first woman I failed to save. Amelia heard the study door open behind her before she turned around. She did not need to look to know it was him. The air itself changed. For the first time since she had met Declan Wolfe, she felt something she had never felt in his presence before. Uncertainty. Not fear, exactly. Something sharper. The terrifying awareness that the man she had married had given her truth, protection, devotion, and patience, but not all of his past. She turned slowly, the photograph still in her hand. Declan stood in the doorway, jacket off, tie gone, expression unreadable in the dim light. His eyes went first to the photo, then to her face. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Amelia's heart was pounding so hard it hurt. "Who is she?" she asked finally, and even to her own ears her voice sounded different, smaller, more fragile than she wanted it to. Declan did not lie. Of course he didn't. That would have been easier. "Her name was Elena Voss," he said. Amelia swallowed. "Why does she look like me?" That question hit harder. Declan took one step into the room, then stopped, was as if understanding instinctively that coming too close too fast would be the wrong move. "She doesn't," he said quietly. "Not really. But I know why you think she does." Amelia's grip tightened around the photograph. "That is not an answer." Declan's jaw flexed. "No," he said. "It isn't." And that was when Amelia realized the wedding ring on her finger had not ended the story. It had opened a new one. There are truths that destroy love, and there are truths that test whether love is strong enough to survive what it learns. Standing there in the study, dressed in silk and diamonds, and the glow of a wedding that now felt abruptly complicated, Amelia understood she was staring at the first real fracture in the fairy tale ending everyone would have assumed she got. She had married the man who caught her when she fell, or the man who made her cheating husband beg, the man who defended her in public and touched her like she was something sacred in private. But she had also married a man with ghosts, a man with blood in his past, a man who had once held another woman while she was dying, a woman who looked enough like Amelia to make coincidence feel impossible. And as she stared at Declan Wolfe across that dim study, one terrible question rose in her chest, louder than all the others. Did he love her for who she was? Or had she awakened something unfinished inside a man who had once failed someone else? Declan took another careful step toward her, voice lower now, stripped of all the effortless control that had once made him feel untouchable. "Amelia," he said, and for the first time, her name sounded like a plea instead of a certainty. "Put the photo down, and I'll tell you everything." Amelia didn't move. Because in that moment, she finally understood the truth no one warns you about when a broken woman falls into the arms of a powerful man. Sometimes the man who saves you is also the man carrying the deepest storm, and sometimes the wedding is not the ending. It is the moment the real story begins. So now the question is this. If you were Amelia, standing in that study on your wedding night with a photograph in your hand, and a man like Declan Wolfe looking at you like he might lose the only thing that has mattered to him in years, would you stay and hear the truth? Or would you run before loving him? Costs you more than your first marriage ever did. Let me know in the comments what you would do, and if you thought this story was intense Just wait until you hear what happens when Declan's past comes back for the woman he married. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter.